questions about how to do shading on something like this. Where do we put the shading? How do we know how things should be shaded, etc. So today I'm going to do just a quick demonstration about shading on a picture like this where we're not necessarily looking at an image to know exactly where the shadows are falling naturally. We have to kind of wing it. We have to just make up our minds how it's going to look and try to execute it in a way that looks natural. So once again, I'm going to record this lesson and hopefully my computer does it and upload it to YouTube after class so you'll be able to refer back to it. And I'll send out an email too with the link so all the students who aren't here today can see it as well. You want to have your variety of drawing pencils for this, not just using a clicker pencil. You want to have the actual drawing pencils so you have different thicknesses and different hardnesses in your lead. I also brought in a few of these blending sticks that we had talked about in class. A few different times I've mentioned these. I found some at the Art Center that are still in packages. I didn't want to deplete our supply too much, so I just brought 2 packages like this. If you want to try one, you can go ahead and pull one from the package. I'll just leave them over there by the workable fixative. Again, please don't take them all. Try to spread them around so that as many of you have a chance to try one as possible. But this is what they look like, and I think you can buy them at Walmart. Sometimes they come in packs of drawing pencils, so if you buy pencils and you get something like this, you might not know what it's for. It's for just smoothly blending if you don't want to have to touch your lead with your finger. So notice how just by blending this cloud that I've already shaded, it gives it a much finer blend, a much smoother blend. We're not seeing individual pencil strokes so much with this. It's becoming more of a solid gray color. And I know some of you really like that effect, so go ahead and give these a try. They will wear down and you know, start to not work as well the more you work with them, so maybe try to use them sparingly for just little sections where you can't blend with your finger. That's going to help them last just a little longer. Another question that I had was, what do we use for a good eraser? And, oh, is that going to show up? Kind of. This kneaded eraser is what I would recommend. It's kind of almost like a clay. When you pick it up, you're going to be able to squish it and form it into shapes once it's out of its package. Again, I think you can pick these up at Walmart. The bookstore may have them as well. They're not too expensive, you know, a few dollars, but this is going to be a better eraser than something that's just on the end of your pencil. So might want to invest in one of those if you find that you're doing a lot of erasing too. So like I said, today I just want to talk about shading just a little bit. So I haven't done anything on this side of my street yet still, so I'm not going to work over there. I'm going to just focus on the side that I have my picture started and to a point where I would be ready to shade it. So one thing that I want to think about is having variety in my scene. So if I decide to shade my first building very, very dark, I'm probably going to want to have more lighter highlights on the one beside it so they don't just all run together and look like one continuous building. You also want to be thinking about where your light source is coming from and shining down onto your picture. So if your sunlight is hitting the sides of the buildings, the fronts are going to be a little bit darker and the sides are going to be just a little bit lighter. If your sun is shining down kind of right down the street and illuminating your store fronts, then those would be shaded a little bit lighter and the sides of your building would be just a little bit darker. So like we talked about earlier, on the sides of the buildings, this would probably be a brick, like the front of my building. Normally I would use a ruler for this, but sides are going to be parallel to top and bottom of paper. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my brick in there so I have something to shade and show difference. Because I want this brick to be the same style as this brick down here, but since it's on a different side of the building, it's going to be shaded just a little bit differently. So we'll go ahead and fill in my brick lines. Might see just a little one right there. So I'm going to have the front of my buildings be what is lighter and more illuminated than the sides. So on my sides, I might go in and start shading the bricks, Maybe I decide I want to have a little bit of darkness on the tops. So it looks like a shadow is being cast underneath from the bricks above it. And I'm just going to go in and kind of lightly shade to begin with. So not too much difference yet happening. I'm going to continue that trend of having the tops have just a little bit of a shadow from the brick that is above them. So I'm pressing down darker with my pencil for my first line and then getting just a little bit lighter as I go. And I might want to do the same thing to accentuate the sides of the grout. So I may go in and make another stronger solid line on the sides of my bricks as well. So now I have some very basic shading on my bricks. But as I continue on, I'll probably come back in and maybe darken spots on one if I want them to look like it's not all exactly the same kind of brick. I might come in and do something like this where I'm just darkening a few of them. But again, it's not a super noticeable change at this point. They all look like they're about the same shade. Now, if I want to continue this kind of pattern, what I've been doing on the front, I want to make sure that I stay just a little bit lighter this time, since my light source is shining right on the front of my buildings. So I'm still doing that little shadow, but very, very lightly shading my bricks as I go down lower on the brick. Again, it looks pretty similar to the side of the building, but a little bit more lightness happening. So I'm not shading as heavily with my pencil. And I am working individually in each brick. If I would just shade the whole row, you would lose that individuality in each brick. It's just going to look a little bit more polished if you take the time to color every single brick individually and add just a little subtle variation as you're going along. So now once again, I might decide to darken slightly just a few of these bricks so they don't look like they're all the same pattern. But I'm still trying to keep the front a little bit lighter than the sides. I think it works best to shade lightly up to dark. Then you don't have to do any erasing or less erasing. So I can always make my picture darker. It's a lot harder to make it lighter again once you put that dark line down. So if you decided that you like the front of the bricks on the building and you want to go in and make this side a little bit darker now, then you could go back in and darken every single brick just a little bit. So really when you're doing shading, it's going to be this process of kind of building up layers, going over things multiple times until you get it looking how you want it to. Another option for when you're designing your buildings, if you don't want them to look like brick, you might want kind of like a stucco effect. You could go in and do the cross hatching technique that we had talked about way earlier on in our lessons. And again, I'm going to start by going very, very lightly. Hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing okay on the screen. I'm not coloring everywhere, just little kind of stipples here and there. And I'm going in different directions too. Sometimes I'm coloring in a diagonal, sometimes it's straight horizontal line, sometimes it's vertical line, but just trying to get kind of a subtle pattern in this building. Doing this tends to make the building look like it's a little bit old. So if some of you are having a downtown scene where you have a lot of destruction or it's an economic downturn in that city, you might think about doing an effect kind of like this, where you're leaving a lot of white space on the building, but coloring kind of spots here and there using your cross-hatching technique. And that will create a different texture on your building. Kind of looks like a stucco pattern, kind of looks like walls that are crumbling. If you really wanted to accentuate crumbling walls, one thing I'm going to do first is darken this line that separates my brick from my new texture down here, and maybe even put just a little shadow under that line. Don't be afraid to pick up different pencils and try different pencils, because Different hardnesses in your leads are going to make shading a lot easier. So I was using, what was I using before? A 9F pencil. Switched over to an HB pencil, which is kind of a medium between the hardest and the softest lead. And that's given me a little bit of a finer line, but also made it a little bit easier to go with a darker line. So if you really wanted to make your building look like it was old and crumbling, you could do this cross-hatching effect and then just draw sort of jaggedy areas around it, and then change what the texture is either inside of these jaggedy areas or on the outside of your building. So I'm trying to show, oops, I forgot to go over here. This is part of my building too. I think I'm going to show that the plaster has crumbled away and left brick underneath. So under these little spaces, you'd still want to use your ruler ideally to get your bricks meeting up with your horizon line, but you could go in and add your brick texture in these little crumbles. So again, just subtle changes to the textures and to your pattern that you're coloring in is going to create very different effects in your picture. I think I want another spot right here where brick is showing through. And you can kind of make this up as you go. You might find that what you initially just thought you were going to do with your picture is not where it ended up, the direction that it ended up going in, but that's okay too. So you can see that I have now just a little bit of interest in this building. We kind of wonder why it looks the way it does. Was that intentional? Is it something that's crumbling and falling down? This is the one that I chose to make my door open. So this area inside the doorway would probably just be a darker black. Once again, you want to think about having a variety of lights and darks in your scene. We don't want it to be all too dark or all too light. If it's all the same value, it's not as interesting to look at. So the bank is coming along pretty nicely. We've got a lot of different patterns, different textures, a very dark point, some lighter points in the scene. With the windows, usually windows look blackish, but sometimes light might be shining on them, so you can do sort of a diagonal pattern like this where it's gets lighter and darker in different areas of the window. So this is just using diagonal lines. And again, different pressures on my pencil. Anybody have any specific things that they're wondering how to do that you would maybe like me to show you? I'm just kind of trying to cover what came up over and over when we were reviewing, but some of you might have different questions. Anybody? Yeah.
Like logos, like in perspective.
Yes. Yes, good question. So your signage and your logos, making them go into perspective. I think when I did my first demonstration, I told you to just leave your guidelines that you had made for windows and doors and for building heights, and those could become the areas where your signage and your logo just kind of plugs into that. You do have to be thinking about how everything gets a little bit smaller as it goes towards the vanishing point. So if you're doing a logo, it's going to kind of look like it fits into a triangle. It's always going to be biggest on the left side if you're working on the left side of the street, biggest on the right side if you're over on the right side of your street, and then getting smaller as it goes towards the center, towards your vanishing point. If you're doing text, you almost have to think about drawing your words. You don't want to just write something on your paper because that's going to throw off the whole drawing. You might have an amazing, awesome picture where all your angles are working just fine, and then you scribble the word, let's see, food. That's going to ruin it because it looks like somebody just labeled your picture. It doesn't look like it's part of the sign that would go there. So if you want to write a word, you need to think about maybe interesting font that you could do. So instead of just your basic scribble lettering, maybe you do kind of a cursive style font. Now on food, it's going to need the D to look a little bit bigger because that's closer to me. So my D is larger than my F. And then my O's. We want to try to keep our lettering similar. So I didn't do much to it, but it's already starting to look more like a sign than when I just scribbled on there. Usually when I do this project with other students, like especially my elementary and high school students, I make a rule that we're not allowed to write words on our paper because otherwise everybody just labels everything and they don't think about the drawing itself. This is not what I wanted. There we go. So let's see. Sorry. I get to see the gum eraser in action though, eventually. There we go. Okay. So you can see it does do a pretty clean erase. I'm going to erase my two O's and start over with them. When you are writing words, draw lightly to begin with because you probably will have a lot of erasing that goes into that. I think I want my O's to be more like a cursive. So that's looking a little bit better. Something you might think about doing too when you have logos and signs on your paper, a lot of times like this coffee cup might be protruding out from the sign, like it might be a plastic neon light or something like that. So you can show side edges of things by just drawing a little, another part to your sign, like a little lip, I guess. Now you would see this on the left side, since it's on the left side of your paper, and then typically on the bottom is where you would see your little shadow piece, and then that's probably going to be shaded in, or maybe it's going to be left white if your logo itself has been shaded in. It's going to need to look just a little bit different than the logo itself. So if my logo was white, so I chose to shade mine so that stands out a little more. It would probably be seen inside the cup too. And this is all stuff that just kind of comes with practice. You start to be able to see this pretty easily, visualize it in your mind. When you're first starting out drawing, it can be hard to know like where those little shadow parts would be showing, what wouldn't have them necessarily. I think I'm going to leave these little pieces. They're too tiny to show that shadow. But notice with this cup, again, it's much larger on this side of the cup than on this side. Even though in real life they're probably even, but since we're getting closer to the vanishing point over here, we had to come down, make it a little bit lower. And then this side didn't really change much because it was almost a flat line. But so whatever signage you decide to draw, I think another person had drawn Target for the Target store. Let's see if I can do the Target symbol here. Because the Target symbol, it's tricky because it's a perfect circle when we see it in life. But since this is a perspective, we're going to see it squished. It's going to look more like a tall oval. And then there's probably going to be, it's going to be just slightly larger on the right side than the left side because we're closer to the right side over here. And then with the center target, there might just be slightly more room between the target and the right side than the target and the left side. Again, because we're getting smaller and smaller as we go back, so we just don't see as much of this space on the other side of it. And then with the target too, you'd probably want to have that show that it's protruding just a little bit. And then we would shade that in. And then also, this little middle bump is going to need one of those too because there's a space in between the two. So pretty good, not too bad for a first attempt there. And again, if you draw lightly, then you can go in and you can re-darken your lines that you know you want to keep. The lighter you draw, the more those lines will just kind of fade away anyway. So if you make a mistake, sometimes you don't even necessarily need to erase it right away because other lines may end up covering it up, or it might just become kind of part of a shading. Anybody else have any questions on specific things for their piece? If you wanted to do a little decoration on this awning, go in and add just some stripes. So basically what I would advise to you, if you've already completed your picture and you feel like you've done a great job of shading, you have some darks, you have some lighter areas, then you probably don't need to go back in and do too much. But if you weren't sure how to do this shading, if your picture is looking kind of flat and just, more like a drawing, it doesn't have much texture yet, go ahead and try some of these techniques that I showed you today. If you do have questions as you're working over the weekend, I'll try to check my email here and there. So if somebody's working on something and they don't have it figured out, let me know. But otherwise, all I want you to do over the weekend is to get caught up on anything that you maybe don't have done yet, and try to get just a little bit more texture, more lights and darks and value contrast into your city. One more thing I'm going to show you before I let you go. I kind of did this backwards with my sky. I wish I would have kept this cloud white and these clouds white and then shaded in the area around it. So now I have some kind of dark clouds. It's going to look just a little bit ominous. But I still am probably going to shade all of these clouds similar to this one. But then I think I still am going to want to go in and do something to my sky itself so that I don't just have dark clouds and then white sky. So I would maybe want to take, let's see, which pencil is going to work best for this. I would want one of my softer pencils that's going to shade just a little bit bigger swaths. This one might be the best one. And again, go ahead and experiment with your pencils, but I'm going to shade really, really lightly up in my sky. So some areas are almost white, other areas are not as dark as my cloud, but maybe close to that. This is where that value scale that we did together really comes in handy because that gave you the practice in different pressures, coloring just subtly lighter or darker. And you want to go down in between your city buildings. Make sure you color close to the edges of things. It's going to just make it look a little bit more polished. But after I've done all of this, sorry, I'm going faster than I would if I wasn't doing a demonstration. Getting a little scribbly. But after I've colored all of this, to try to smooth it out now, I could take either my finger or my blending tool and just try to lightly smooth away some of these jagged lines that I might have accidentally made when I was coloring my sky. So even though the cloud is colored and the sky is colored, we can still see a pretty strong contrast between the two. And I might decide to go in and even darken up that cloud a little bit more so there's even stronger contrast. If you wanted to, I don't know if this is going to work or not. Maybe a smaller eraser would work better, but could go in then and add some little snowflakes. Yeah, a smaller eraser would be better for that, so I'm not going to do that, but you can experiment with different things in your sky too. Just make sure that it isn't, totally white sky. You do want something going on up there. Like I said, probably I wish I would have left my clouds white and then shaded my background. I could maybe go in and erase that one cloud that I shaded early on. See how it looks next to the white clouds. Thank you for your patience today, guys. Hopefully some of this has been helpful. And like I said, I will go ahead and upload it to YouTube. So if you were zoned out and you realize later that something I said might be useful, you can go in and check that out again. I don't really like to overuse this blending stick. I prefer to shade with just my pencil only because I kind of like that linear effect that happens with with shading. But I know a lot of students really like to use these blending tools, so I wanted to give that option too. Yeah, I think I like my dark sky closest to my white clouds rather than my dark cloud, but sometimes we need to just experiment and learn what we should do differently next time. So I think that was pretty much all I wanted to show you, unless somebody else has a specific question or something they would like to see. Anyone? Good? Okay. Well, good job so far, guys. Everybody's picture is looking really good. And please come to class Monday. If you do more work on your picture, I'll look at it then. Otherwise, I'm hoping we can start talking about still lifes on Monday. So enjoy your weekends. Is there anybody that wasn't here Wednesday that needs to show me their picture yet, even if you're not done with it? Okay, you can come on up.